And good evening. I am reading Satan's Trilogy, Book 1, Chapter 4, and this will be reading 27. Hope you enjoy it. Brandy finished her glass of beer and said, "Esther, I need to use the restroom. I'd better stop eating or I could really regret it later. Can you ask for a to-go box if the waitress comes back while I'm at the restroom?" By now the restaurant was very busy, with dozens of people waiting to be seated. Brandy was slightly unstable as she made her way to the restroom. But no one noticed, nor paid attention. The customer noise level was high, and with people laughing and shouting, no one noticed Esther's aunt moving slowly to the restrooms. Nilda returned asking, "Was everything all right?" as she set the carry-out box on the far end of the table. "Oh, yes," said Esther. "This was the best pizza that I have ever had, and my aunt enjoyed it too." Nilda placed the check on the edge of the table. "I can take your payment whenever you're ready." Esther quickly placed a $50 bill on the top of the check and said, "Food and service was wonderful. Please keep the change." Seeing Esther had given her a very generous tip, Nilda said, "Thank you very much. Please have a wonderful evening and return soon." It appeared that Nilda wanted to talk with Esther, but she was called away by the manager. Appearing a bit upset at not having a chance to finish her conversation with Esther, Nilda turned and left. A very old man was making his way past the tables at the far end of the room. He seemed a bit confused and perhaps lost. Esther had witnessed many older people that suffered mild to severe dementia, and this person seemed only moderate confused, if at all. He was wearing cuffed woolen slacks, a white long-sleeved shirt, and a pair of gray suspenders. Esther had seen many men dressed like this in Italy. She and her father had lived there for several months. When Esther was 12 years old, he stopped at each table for just a moment and spoke some Italian to the customers. Most of the customers smiled and nodded their heads. They didn't understand what he was saying. No one spoke Italian. He stopped at the table next to Esther's and spoke to them in Italian. A rather large and muscular man sitting at the table with two other men seemed rather annoyed at the old man's presence. "Go away, old man, I am busy." He didn't seem willing to tolerate the old man, not even for a few seconds. Smiling and leaning forward over the table, the old man spoke some more Italian and then leaned back ready for a response. He didn't seem to realize that none of the customers spoke Italian. His aged face seemed very frail, and yet he still had strength in his presence that was difficult to describe. Esther had been listening to the old man. He was thanking the customers for coming to his restaurant, and that he hoped they had enjoyed themselves. He always introduced himself as Luciano Pilarzi. It was obvious to Esther that this man was the founder of the restaurant. At that moment, the customer sitting ahead of Esther waved his hand at Mr. Pilarzi and asked him to leave the table. Speaking in German, He told his companions that if this old man didn't stop bothering him, he would knock his head off. Laughing at what he had just said, the German again turned his attention to the old man. Esther flew out of her seat and came between Luciano and the seated customer. "This is Luciano Pelerzi. He is thanking you for eating at his restaurant, and he hopes that you have enjoyed yourselves." Esther smiling at the customers and trying to diffuse the situation. The man was distracted by Esther's sudden interruption and moved back just a bit. "Just tell him to leave our table. We're having a private conversation and don't want to be interrupted." He was looking Esther straight in the eyes, and his frustration with the annoyance was cooling down. Esther smiled at the man. "Certainly, I'll ask him to join me at my table." Luciano Pelerzi, "Join me at my table." Esther spoke to him in Italian. Esther was smiling at the Signor Pelerzi, and as his attention was drawn to her, Luciano Pelerzi forgot his original intentions and focused on Esther. And in Italian, he spoke to Esther. "No one seems to speak Italian but you. Such a beautiful young woman. Are you Italian?" The old man that once was very tall and imposing with his stature still towered over Esther in height. He had certainly lost some of his male strengths and sexual prowess, and yet he still had his original charm that made him adorable. Esther nearly giggled at the suggestion that she was possibly Italian, with her long blonde hair and pale skin. That would be a rarity. Esther smiled and replied in Italian, "At heart, I'm Italian. My father and I lived in Vatican City for a long time. I love food and family. That makes me Italian." Esther giggled a bit after her response. The old man had fallen under her spell. Captivated by such a lovely young woman that spoke Italian flawlessly, he started to share his life story with her. Esther enjoyed listening to his childhood in the old country and his family's move to the city, where his father opened a restaurant. The family left Italy just before World War II broke out. Luciano's father had envisioned a difficult time had they remained in Italy, and so he moved his family, including Luciano, to the United States. Brandy walked around the corner. She was holding on to anything and everything that she could to help her stabilize her walk back to the table. Seeing that Esther had someone sitting across from her, Brandy slipped into the booth alongside of Esther. Esther stood up to allow her aunt to sit down and then explained to her guest, "And Brandy, this is Luciano Pelerzi. He opened this restaurant over 50 years ago. He was thanking all the customers for stopping by tonight, and so I asked him to sit with us a while." Esther turned to Luciano Pelerzi and then motioned at her aunt. Speaking in Italian, "Mr. Pelerzi, this is my Aunt Brandy. She loves your restaurant and brought me here tonight. We are celebrating. I have just moved back home." Esther was simplifying things for Luciano, but it was all basically true. Luciano was old, very old, and Esther didn't want to confuse him. He had shared a few charming stories with Esther, and in doing so won Esther's admiration. At that moment, Luciano Pelerzi III approached the table, Speaking in Italian, "Grandfather, I should have known that I would find you with some beautiful women. The night is young and you are needed in the kitchen." The younger Luciano smiled lovingly at his grandfather, while standing at a short distance shaking his head. Speaking in Italian, he said, "If you would only take your medicine, you might remember how much you are needed in the kitchen. Things run so much smoother when you are helping in the back." The old man turned to Esther and smiled. Speaking in Italian, he said, "My grandson thinks my memory is failing me. He wants me to take some pills to help my memory." Esther spoke softly to the old man in Italian. "My grandfather lived a long time, and he took pills to help his memory. He told me that he never wanted to forget I was his granddaughter." Esther gave the old man a soft smile and reached across the table to touch his hand. And in Italian she spoke to him. "I would be sad if, on our next visit, you did not remember my aunt and me. It would be great to have a longer visit. Perhaps we could share a Pilarzi pizza." Esther smiled at Luciano as he sat silently contemplating her words. Looking about the restaurant and studying the people, Luciano seemed to be experiencing a revelation. Turning to his grandson, the old man, in very clear English, said to him, "Luciano, do you have my pills on you?" "Yes, grandfather, of course. I keep them on me, hoping that you will ask for them." The old man was studying his grandson. "You know, Luciano, I never want to forget who you are, and for that matter, all of my wonderful family. Please give me the pills, and I will take them when you tell me to." The old man had his hand stretched out to his grandson, smiling at him. The grandson reached inside of the pocket on his crisp white shirt and pulled out a small plastic pillbox. Flipping the lid open, he poured 6 pills into the outstretched hand of his grandfather. Luciano Pilarzi quickly popped the pills into his mouth and took a few sips of water from Esther's glass. Looking at Esther, Luciano Pilarzi spoke to Esther. "I would like to remember you too, and your lovely aunt. Please let me know in advance the next time you will grace our restaurant with your presence, and I'll make certain to have an Italian dinner prepared for us all to enjoy. Now please excuse me, as my grandson has pointed out, the kitchen needs me." As Luciano Pilarzi stood, Esther also got up from the table and came around to the old man. "I look forward to seeing you again." In Italian, she said, "My friend." Esther leaned forward and gave the old man a kiss on his cheek. With a large grin on his face, Luciano Pilarzi headed back to the kitchen. Luciano Pilarzi III watched his grandfather go through the doors to the kitchen and then turned to Esther. "I must apologize. I mistook you for just another beautiful young woman. I was so far from right that I am ashamed of myself. You have performed a miracle tonight. My family and I are in your debt." Luciano Pilarzi III was overcome with happiness and gratitude. It was difficult for him to speak for a moment. "You know, when my grandfather says he'll prepare you an Italian dinner, you should come hungry. I hope you'll make that call to my grandfather soon for your return visit." Luciano took a look at Brandy and paused. "We'll really look forward to seeing the both of you again." Esther sensed that Luciano was making eye contact with her aunt and was showing more than just a friendly interest. Two men in one day looking at her Aunt Brandy attention, and she seemed totally disinterested with their advances. Although in this case Brandy was still feeling numb from the pitcher of beer that she had just emptied. So perhaps Aunt Brandy might be interested in Luciano, but her present state was blocking any clearer thinking. Aunt Brandy slept the entire trip home, and Esther had to help her to bed. Aunt Brandy had a wonderful king-size bed with soft cotton sheets and silk bedspread that felt like heaven. Having experienced many harsh discomforts in her life, Esther thought to herself how lucky it was that her aunt had such wonderful small comforts. Brandy fell asleep instantly. Esther had pulled her aunt's clothes off, leaving only her panties on, and then kissed her cheek, and pulled the sheets up to her aunt's shoulders. Before leaving the bedroom, Esther picked up Brandy's alarm clock and set the wake-up time for 5 in the morning. It was only 9 at night. Certainly that would be plenty of time to wake up, shower, and enjoy a small breakfast together. After unloading the car, Esther went to the kitchen where she cleaned and organized dishes and accessories. It was here that she felt most comfortable, more relaxed, and at peace. Tomorrow she would prepare a wonderful breakfast for her aunt and her to enjoy. Since it was still very early, Esther decided to go to Chin Ho's grocery store and pay for the waffle iron that she had decided to keep. Esther wouldn't need sleep for at least several more hours, and why not make use of the free time? Having jumped onto her Ninja 650, Esther enjoyed the breeze flowing about her and the cool air that flowed up her helmet during the ride to Ho's grocery. The evening was exceptionally dark, with heavy cloud cover, yet her headlight did an excellent job of lighting the way. Pulling into the parking lot of Chen's grocery, Esther found the closest parking spot in a nearly empty lot and parked her Ninja. The store had 2 large windows on each side of the door. Bars prevented easy entry should someone try breaking the glass while the store was closed. Esther walked into the store and found Mr. Ho standing behind the counter, as she had seen him twice before. And I believe we'll stop there. That was reading 27, Book 1, Chapter 4. Hope you enjoyed it.